Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this 1 p.m. webinar hosted by the City of San Jose to go over the subject of the recent changes announced to the PPP loan program. My name is Vic Farley, and I work for the Office of Economic Development here in the city, and I've been hosting a series of webinars particularly on issues of finance, capital, loans and grants in recent weeks. So I'm delighted you're able to join me today. I'm going to go through a slide deck quite quickly and should aim to complete that within 20 minutes because I do want to get into some of the most important elements of the changes that were announced this week. And then I'd like to leave quite some time for a Q&A session, and we'll wrap up and close the webinar at the latest by 2 p.m. So bear with me as we go through this, and please use the chat box and the Q&A, and I will be providing my contact information on the final slide. So if there are any thoughts that you have after this webinar and you want to come back and ask me a question or check in on an issue, please feel free to do so. So I hope you find this a useful update of what's happening, because there's a lot happening at the moment. Here we go. So here's our agenda. I'll give you a quick overview of the program of PPP, a quick run through the eligibility, and then we'll concentrate on what's new. And I'm going to highlight really 3 issues that I think are of most significance for you, the business owner. The new exclusive 14-day window for small business applications, the change in the loan calculation for the sole proprietor, and the opportunity for the undocumented business owner to apply. And that's all 3 issues are very important for small business here in San Jose. I'll finally go into a few top tips from where I am and what I can see, and then we'll get into the Q&A, and I'll leave you with some references if you want to read up into the more detail in your own time. So that's what we're going to run through in the next hour. Here's my disclaimer. This webinar is for information purposes only. We're acting in good faith, but we make no representation or warranty regarding the accuracy, adequacy, and the availability of the information we provide. And as you would expect, this is financial information, so the city has no liability for any loss or damage incurred. What I do ask all people who I've spoken to on issues of finance is always take professional advice, either directly with your tax preparer, CPA, or if you employ a finance person within your business, speak directly to them on these matters to gain more understanding. Thank you. So the program overview, where are we at the moment with PPP? PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, is currently live. All businesses can now apply for a PPP loan. As at last Friday, February the 19th, close to half the funds were still available, but the program will close currently. It's scheduled to close March 31st. So we've only got just over 4 weeks for all businesses to make their application. Current feedback that I'm getting suggests there's a 10 to 12 day lender approval process. Each lender, a bank, has a slightly different way of conducting their business. So some are faster than others, but that seems to be the general kind of vibe that I pick up when I look at issues that come to me, or when I look at places like Facebook that have very large PPP membership groups. You get a sense that it's a 10 to 12 day approval process. There appears to be more scrutiny and compliance if the loan is valued in excess of $150,000. And it's important that your documentation, particularly your tax returns and your quarterly financial statements, are accurate, prepared, and ready when you make that application for a loan above $150,000. If you're still looking for a lender, particularly for many of you in the second round here, a lot of questions that have come to me is who's providing a second round 2 PPP loan. You can check online with the SBA, the Small Business Administration online tool called Lender Match. It's there. I've previously provided businesses with the link. And if you want that link, just send me an email and I'll provide it to you. In addition, search online for other CDFIs and fintech lenders. CDFIs are our local mission-driven lenders, such as the Opportunity Fund, and fintech lenders. Interestingly, they include businesses such as QuickBooks. Many small businesses run their accounting software using QuickBooks. Well, QuickBooks has its own internal bank that offers PPP loans, and that's often a very efficient way to proceed. So just quick, I won't go into the detail of the eligibility. That hasn't really changed with this week's announcements, but the business must have existed prior to February the 15th, 2020. You must have previously received a first draw PPP loan in order to be able to apply for a second draw. You must not have more than 300 employees, and you have to have demonstrated a 25% reduction in gross receipts between comparable financial quarters in 2019 and 2020. And that last point has been something that has caused a great deal of question and commentary as to how that's done. And we covered that in a previous webinar. But if that's of issue to you, again, please email me. I'll be happy to cover that point. Key numbers in the payroll calculation, because this is a payroll-driven program, there's an annual $100,000 ceiling per employee, irrespective of role and total remuneration. Those are how the numbers break down. And the calculation is driven on the basis of 2.5 months or 3.5 months if you're a restaurant. If it's 2.5 months, that's equivalent to 20.8% of your annual payroll, just over 20%. And if you're a restaurant, it's almost 30% of your annual payroll. So just to look at the eligibility, this is the quick matrix that I produced in an earlier webinar that you can just see. If you look down on the left-hand column there, the annual payroll, you can quickly see roughly where your business payroll number is for 2020. So if you had a payroll of $250,000, you should be anticipating applying for a PPP loan in the region of $50,000. And if your payroll is $2.5 million, you're around at the 20% number, it's around $500,000. That's just to give you a quick guide as to how payroll converts into loan amount. But of course, there is a lot of detail that sits behind that. That's just your quick guide. So let's get into the meat of what the changes were that were announced this week by the White House. So in the White House statement, and I've got the reference for that statement at the end of this slide deck, there were 5 key points here. First of all, there was a 14-day exclusivity period, and that came into effect yesterday. And that means that any business now applying for a PPP loan over the course of the next 14 has to meet a specific criteria, and that is you must not be employing more than 20 people. And I'll go into detail in that in a moment. Secondly, and very significantly, if you're a sole proprietor, an independent contractor, self-employed, or a gig worker, the PPP funding formula is to be revised and to, in effect, and when I cover that in more detail in a moment, it's to make the opportunity to secure a much bigger PPP loan if you are a sole proprietor, independent contractor, and self-employed. It's probably the most significant financial change that was announced. Thirdly, ensuring access for the non-citizen small business owner. If you're a lawful US resident, but you are not a citizen, you can claim a PPP loan using an individual taxpayer identification number. That's, again, a big change because it allows many undocumented business owners who are lawfully here in the United States to be able to apply for a PPP loan. And previously in 2020, many such business owners found that they were ineligible to apply. So it's going to be very important for many of our business owners here in the city of San Jose to be aware of this change and to be able to make an application for a PPP loan. And I'm going to cover that in a bit more detail as well. There are 2 other aspects of the changes. One is around convictions, and a number of small business owners with prior non-fraud felony convictions were ineligible to apply. Now you can. And that will be the big change with rules coming into effect next week, that if you have a non-fraud felony conviction as a business owner, you may apply for a PPP loan. And finally, many small business owners, particularly the self-employed and the sole proprietor, people who have recently left college, anyone who and gone into business, set up their own business, who struggled to make the federal loan payments, and have been in loan debt delinquency and therefore unable or disqualified to participate and claim or apply for a PPP loan, may now be eligible to do so once the new rules come into effect. So those are the 5 key main changes announced by the White House this week: the 14-day exclusivity period, the revised funding formula for the sole proprietor, the access for the business owner with an ITIN number, and the elimination of the exclusionary restriction on non-fraud felony convictions, and finally, eligibility despite having in default of your student loan debt. So those are the 5 key points. Let's look at the first 3 in more detail. So what's new with this 14-day exclusivity period? Essentially, only businesses with a headcount of up to 20 employees will be eligible to apply. What this means is that headcount is not the full-time equivalent. It's a list of all staff on the payroll. So if you have, for instance, 4 full-time equivalents and 20 part-time equivalents, that equals 24 people on the headcount. You are ineligible to apply during this 14-day exclusivity period. If you have 19 full-time equivalents, you are eligible to apply. So you must be aware that headcount is not the same as full-time equivalents. Any application accepted by a bank, a lender, prior to February the 24th, so if you submitted your application last Friday and it's currently being processed by a bank or a lender, it will continue to be processed and ultimately approved. So new applications with a 20 plus headcount, if you were to apply during this exclusivity period, it will be automatically rejected by the SBA. So be aware. And we don't know the consequence of that. We don't know if the application were rejected, whether that would enable you to reapply once the exclusivity period is over, or whether there will be some form of delay. And I am worried that with the program scheduled to close on March 31st, that there could be a sufficient enough delay after March 10th that your application may not get approved in time. So my sense of this to you as the business owner is to be cautious, be aware of this rule. And if you have a head count over 20 and you haven't yet applied, you should do so on March 10th, because that way the system will have reopened in full to allow businesses of any payroll size, any headcount, to be able to submit the application. So that's the exclusivity period, February 24th through to March 10th. And it's designed to enable small businesses, that's how the White House frames this, to have the opportunity to get funded whilst there is this significant budget still available. Okay, probably the biggest change here is how sole proprietors and the self-employed will be, how they will be able to apply for a PPP loan and the value of that loan. As you know, if you applied last year in round 1 and you were a sole proprietor, and here in San Jose, we estimated, looking at the SBA data, that 25% of all applications came from sole proprietors here in the city. It was a significant number of people. So somewhere in the region of just under 3,000 business applications approved for a PPP loan were from business owners who were self-employed or sole proprietors. Now, the key shift is, if you're looking at the slide here on the screen, is that it will be gross income that is used to determine the value of a PPP loan, not simply what has previously been used, which is net income. Now, the way to understand that, if you're not familiar with your financial records, is to look at an IRS 1040 Schedule C. And I'm going to show on the next slide an example of the key difference this makes to the dollar value of the loan application. We expect the detailed regulations for this change to be published by the SBA next week. So the important point here is to pause and wait to see how the detail of those regulations will affect the calculation of the PPP loan. And if you're a sole proprietor, a number of people last year asked me the question, well, should I be applying for, say, unemployment insurance, because that would be a bigger dollar value than, say, one of these tiny PPP loans? It could well be that once you see the detail next week, that the calculation is so significantly different for a PPP loan, you may need to revisit your earlier decision as to whether you applied for unemployment insurance. So it's very important to look at that. So what I'm suggesting here to you as a piece of advice, if you're a sole proprietor and previously you didn't claim a PPP loan because you could see that the value was so small, just wait a few days. And whilst you're doing that, make sure you obtain your financial records so you're ready to go, ready to make that application once the rules and regulations are known in detail. So here's an example of a completed 1040C, not the IRS form that a business will complete each year as part of their tax filing process. And as you know, we are now in the tax filing season, which started on February the 12th and runs to April 15th. So many CPAs, tax preparers that I've been speaking to, are currently very busy as they're responding to the fact that they've got to file the 2020 tax on behalf of your business. So looking at this, if you look here at the top line, this is line 1, and what the SBA had previously agreed with banks and lenders is you'd look at line 7. And that is taken as your standard gross income after deductions, the $50,299. Claiming last year it was based on net income. So if we look to the bottom here as this example, your PPP loan application may only have been valued at $2,014. And if you go back up to the 50,000, that's the margin of difference between how the PPP rules are currently written and your loan value application, and where they could end up after next week. And the dollar number is so significant here that the value to you is to ensure that you wait to see those regulations and to check in with your tax preparer or CPA to go through those numbers in some detail so that you have a very clear understanding as to what the dollar value will mean for you. I'll take questions on this just when we get to the end of this slide deck. But this is an example I just used just to give you an illustration of the difference in the dollar value of the PPP loan as a result of the change and the use of gross income, not net income, for the sole proprietor going forward. So as I've mentioned, if you're an undocumented business owner, you can now, after the rules come out next week, make an application for a PPP loan with an ITIN number. Businesses use their ITIN number. It's issued by the IRS. So check your tax filing or now go to the IRS and apply. If you think you do not have an ITIN number, now is the time to apply. An ITIN number is a 9-digit number and it always begins with the number 9. So see your tax preparer or CPA, do not wait, because you want to be ready to make an application once those new rules and regulations are published next week. So this is just a quick statement that came from the SBA today. Loans submitted prior to the official rule changes are subject to the rules in effect at the time of the application. And that's very significant if you're a sole proprietor. They're not going to turn the clock back and say, hey, these new rules that are coming into effect next week, we can go back in time for sole proprietors who may have applied in January or February under round 2. That's why it's really important to just reflect, get your paperwork in order, and be ready to go with it once the regulations and the rules come into play next week. What if I never applied for a PPP loan? Well, as I've mentioned, wait to see the rules, then apply for round 1 and get ready to apply straight away for round 2. And depending on how you're going to judge this and the rules that are required, and this is why I think it's important to check with a CPA and a tax preparer. If you haven't got a CPA and a tax preparer, you can obtain free advice from organizations like the Small Business Development Center, and I'll leave you with some details in the slide deck. And they'll be able to give you a kind of sense of how to apply, when to apply, and who to apply to. Here's my good practice summary. If you've already got a bank and a lender you work with, check in with them. Ensure that your first PPP loan was fully used and authorized. Many businesses are now completing the loan forgiveness application process. I was looking at the numbers at a federal level, and around 5% of all businesses that took a loan last year have had their loan forgiveness approved. And it's interesting to note that it's over 90% of the loan value has been forgiven from those round 1 PPP loans. So it's important that you're aware of that. Locate your 2019 and 2020 profit and loss statement now, and talk to your CPA tax preparer or SBDC, as I've already mentioned on several occasions, if you need advice. Ideally, plan ahead. Have a forecast of your P&L for 21 to see what the 8 to 24 week period you should choose for PPP, and keep a record of receipts to secure with the 60% on the payroll to obtain your loan forgiveness, and keep your bank statements as a record for 4 years. That's my little short good practice summary. If you want the references to see what I've presented to you in more detail, here's the White House press statement. Here's the SBA press statement, and here I thought was a pretty good press article that came out today by Inc., the small business magazine. So you can click on these links and read at your leisure. Okay, let me pause here. I can see we've got 8 questions in the Q&A, and let me try and run through them for you. If anything here I've gone through too quickly, please put a question. I'm more than happy to go back to a specific slide and get into more detail. Okay, Pinnakin has asked, how many PPP loans can you apply for? I've already applied and received 2 PPP loans recently and have not yet applied for forgiveness. If you've applied and received both loans, that's it. You cannot apply for any more. You can apply for loan forgiveness for round 1, provided you have used that loan. So if you applied in 2020 or very early 2021 and your 8-week period is over, then you can make that application for loan forgiveness. But that's it. It's 2 loans only, round 1 and round 2. There's no round 3 or subsequent. Second question, how will the SBA determine that your 25% loss of gross revenue quarter over quarter? Is it through signed bank statements, bank statements, signed P&Ls, both or otherwise? You have to check with your lender, first of all, in terms of your 25% loss of gross revenue, but generally it can be either or both, the bank statement or the signed P&L. I've generally said to businesses, bank statements are an authentic, verified way of proving the loss of income, particularly where that bank statement comes from the financial institution that you're applying to for the purpose of the PPP. If you're using a bank statement to apply for a different financial institution, check with them. And I have seen that, for instance, if the loan is under 150,000, by example, and most loans generally are, about 75% of all PPP loans are under $150,000. then often the lender will accept a signed P&L. So it's very much lender driven here. Check with them if you can. If it's an online fintech bank where that's not possible, either or a bank statement or a signed P&L. And Amy has asked, what if my business opened in December 2019? I don't have a full quarter to compare 20% reduction of business. How do I prove wage loss without the 2 full-time quarters? That's a really good question. I'm going to have to go back into the regulations, Amy, and answer that, because that question has come up before and there is a way of doing that. So I kind of want to reassure you, Amy, there is a way to apply under those circumstances. But I would need to have a quick look at the regulations. So Amy, if you would do me the courtesy of emailing me on my email address at the bottom, I will send you an answer to that later on this afternoon, if I may. Okay, next question is, a business owner took over an existing business in November and the previous owner had taken out a PPP loan and is waiting for forgiveness. Okay. As the new owner, we seem to be stuck in between as to whether we can apply. We are told we step into the shoes of the previous, so we can't apply for the first time, right? But then we can't apply for the second time either, even though the previous owner was invited to apply for the second. It could still, if they were owning it. Okay, let me just read. It's quite a long question. We were then told we could apply for the first after all. We're confused. Yeah, I can see why you're confused by that. That's a really difficult story, isn't it? We are in the process of hiring additional staff to replace the one that has retired. Our current last 3 months payroll will not show this. Oh, wow. Okay. I think you need to go and talk. First off, you need to talk to 2 people about that. You first of all need to talk to your lender and check with them if you have, let's assume you have a lender here. If you don't have a lender, you need to start making some inquiries as to a lender who would be available. Let me see, I've got more questions coming in. Let me just go back. You then need, in theory, you are stepping into the shoes of an existing business. Let's assume that it's the same legal structure. You've effectively bought the equity of that company. You have replaced the previous owner. You haven't changed the business name or the legal structure. It is the same. Then it is the business that is then claiming the loan. And if you have claimed one loan already as a business, you should, in theory, be eligible to claim a second loan of round 2. Now, whether you could get into claiming a round 1 and a round 2 by virtue of the change of ownership, I've not seen that before. I want to be slightly cautious with you here, and I would say go and see a CPA after you've spoken to the lender. If you need more advice on that, I would suggest you go to the Small Business Development Centre to just check in there. But it would seem to me the principle here is the business, not the owner. You weren't self-employed before. You didn't make a claim that way. So presuming you didn't make a claim and it wasn't part of a group of companies, then you should be claiming a round 2 PPP loan. It's a really good question. It's really interesting circumstances, and I'd be happy again to follow up with you after the webinar to see if there's more information that I can supply to you. Susan has asked the question, is it 2019 or 2020 gross income? That depends on whether you're claiming round 1 or round 2. Let's assume it's round 2, then it's 2020 gross income. Skylar asked me, if someone has already applied or received funds as an independent contractor, can they request additional funds under the new regulations? If this was a round 2 application that has already been submitted, then no, you cannot request additional funds under the new regulation. That's really what that quote that I put into a slide was referring to, that the SBA have made a statement on today, which is basically they're not going to turn the clock back and say all the approved loans from sole proprietors can now be recalculated. You applied then, that's the amount you were approved for. They're not going to allow you to reapply or to have that loan value reassessed. If there's any caveat to what I'm saying is we'll check the financial regulations that come out next week on that. But I think that that SBA statement was significant today because obviously they're aware of the thousands of applications that were made in, say, January and February up to date once PPP round 2 opened. So it is disappointing, Skylar, but I think that's the line that the SBA have drawn here. George asks, sorry, let's see, sorry, the questions keep coming onto the screen. George asks, sorry, should you use form Schedule C page 1, not form 1040 page? Thank you. Should you use? I need to check that with you, George. I'm not a CPA. I'll check that and come back to you on that, George. But it's generally Schedule C. So that's the general advice when I was talking to a CPA earlier today, that it's Schedule C, page 1, not form 1040. So if I've inadvertently confused anyone, I apologize, George. It is form Schedule C. Okay, Turvey has asked me, you have applied for round 1 first. Why? If you never did so last year. Well, I think the question there is, have you made any application that's been approved? If you have, then that's classified as a round 1 loan. If you've not had a loan approved at all, then you can make a round 1 loan application. And then once you have used those funds, you can then make a round 2 application. And the sensitivity here, of course, is we're down to 5 weeks only before the program expires. So I think, again, check in with a lender. If they'll accept the application for round 1, do it now, claim the funds, and then see if you can make a round 2 application prior to March 31st. It's going to be tight. Will the seminar be sent via email to attendees to watch? Asks Ernesto. Yes, it will. Everyone who registered, and we had more than 150 businesses register for this seminar today, will receive a copy of the slide deck and a copy of the recording of this webinar. Okay. Let me see. Let's look at. Liu has asked me, any changes on owner occupation for self-employed, a single member LLC? Are single member LLCs considered a sole proprietor? If I have applied for PPP2 already and is under review, can I apply again under this guideline? Oh, good questions. Okay. I am not close to the legal identity of a single member LLC, but it will be very interesting to check the regulations next week. My sense of this is an LLC is a legal structure, however many members there are. So it could well be that would not treat you as classified as self-employed. So let's wait for the regulation to answer that one, Liu. My sense of this, though, is as distinct from LLC, from being self-employed, there is a key legal difference, and therefore it could be that that's inappropriate or isn't considered eligible, because looking at the White House statement, they were very specific in referring to the sole proprietor, the self-employed, and organizations that don't have a payroll, or organizations such as a gig worker as being eligible. If you've already applied and it's under review and it hasn't yet been approved, then you should check with the lender, because it could be in your interest to withdraw that application and resubmit it once the new guidance has been published next week. So again, that's a check with the lender answer, and they may themselves need to take advice before answering that question. So I think there could be an opportunity here for you. If the PPP has already been approved by the lender, then no, they're not going to reverse that. So that's a very interesting kind of gray area in terms of where we are. Kim asks, will all the new changes go away after the exclusive period and the current, if you like, the original? No, the only exclusivity period rule is around headcount. So the changes on ITIN number, the changes on gross income, and the changes on loan default and non-fraud felony will continue through to March 31st until the program expires. That's the expectation. That's pretty clear in the White House press statement. Hanny is asking, our company is a small company, less than 20 employees, and we applied for a PPP a few weeks ago. Up to date, we haven't heard anything back from the SBA on the decision. How is this new rule? The smallest. Okay, well, if you've got less than 20 employees, they will, and you applied prior to yesterday, they should be administering and processing that application. It should not in any way be rejected. If you haven't heard back, I would want to really contact the lender here. It's not the SBA that's making the decision, it's the lender that's making the decision, and the SBA is processing that decision. Sometimes the SBA is doing an audit compliance check on an application, but it is fundamentally the lender's decision as to how they approve and the application of the existing rules and regulations to you, the applicant. So if you applied a few weeks back and you haven't heard, I would really want to follow up. If you're not happy with the lender's communication or customer service, then that's when I think you should go directly to the SBA to ask them to see if they can do something on your behalf. When will the recording we try and get a recording of the presentation out within 2 days, within 48 hours. We'll do our best to get the application, the recording out to you as soon as we can, but we generally go for a 48-hour turnaround. I have an S Corp and I'm the only employee, and I submitted my 2019 1120S to my bank, and they're not accepting my application, asking me to provide info online. How do I answer? Okay, so sorry about this. The questions as they come in, it moves the questions up the screen. Let me read that again. I've got an S Corp, I'm the only employee. How do I qualify for the second? I did receive the first loan, says Sam. Okay. I think you've got to go back to the bank and ask them for a clear statement in writing as to what they are and what they're not accepting. If you're not happy with what they're saying, and you can either then make a decision to withdraw that application and then look to submit another application with an alternative lender, or you might want to pause and go to the SBA directly to just check with them on the rules and regulations. And the San Francisco office of the SBA is very helpful, and you can see that online if you were to put into your Google search SBA San Francisco office, or if you send me an email, I can send you the link directly. If you did receive the first loan at some point, whether it was 2020 or early 2021, then you know you're only applying for round 2. And with the regulations being published next week, I would say don't make a final decision till you see those regulations, but do have the communication now with the bank to check on everything. And if you're not happy with that, then follow up with the SBA. It's a good point, very interesting. Jose has asked a different question. 2019 was an unusually low year for my business. Minor improvements in all quarters in 2020. Could we compare to similar 2018 quarters? No, is the general view. Again, we'd have to check some of the detailed here, Jose, but I think that the general rule is that only comparing 2020 to 2019, because in general, this is about how COVID impacted the operations of the business, leading to a financial loss or a downturn or a reduction in gross receipts compared to pre-COVID, judged to be 2019. So you're in a slightly unusual circumstance here. Julio said, I have 4 companies, not 14, but I applied for the regular SBA loans. This will be my first time. I pay, yeah, I don't have one. Okay, I think, Julio, please seek out the SBDC for some free technical advice here. You've got a lot to run through, and I would encourage you, Julio, I couldn't get into that level of detail with you now, but I could say to you, please go and see an expert such as the Small Business Development Center and just talk that through, have an appointment with them and explain your circumstances. I think it's an interesting, yeah, you've got an interesting case there again. Yeah. Yeah, take technical advice, Julio, definitely. Q has asked, my business net income in 29 was not much, but my business income was higher. Does that mean I'll be qualified for a bigger PPP loan this time around, given the new rule? Yeah, so wait for the detailed regulations to come out next week. I will certainly be posting those detailed regulations online through the SJ Economy and the city's website, if anyone wants to just check on that. But clearly, you know, look in the news and check online. So yes, do wait until next week before you submit any application. And yes, potentially there could be a much more significant change for you if your gross income was higher in 2020. But let's look to see if they're going to make some judgment comparing 2020 with 2019, just to make sure you're eligible to apply and that your application would be approved. But potentially, Key, you're in a good position here. No payroll, I'm run for the sole owner. That should be okay. You should be able to make an application depending on the legal structure. We had that question earlier around LLCs, for instance. Okay. My company's fiscal year, sorry, the questions are coming in now, is from July 1 to June 30th. Oh, okay. Check with your CPA or your tax preparer on that one around the way you use financial years, which is different from calendar years, and how the SBA, in terms of the rules, are generally working to calendar years. Great question. Do check with your CPA on that one. If you don't have a CPA or a tax preparer, send me an email and I'll try and dig out the specific regulation in the SBA on this issue of timing and send you the relevant section to you. What if the 2020 books are not yet up to date? Does this require, could the bank statements be used already? If you're a sole proprietor, I think it would really assist you to get your tax affairs ready, because if they're going to rely on a 1040C, then you need to be at that point where a CPA or a tax preparer has got it ready for you to file. If you're a company structure, I do believe, depending on if the loan is under $150,000, as I mentioned in an earlier answer, it could be the bank statements are sufficient or a signed P&L. Can you confirm, if I haven't applied for a round 2 PPP loan yet, would you advise that I wait until next week to see what the guidelines are? Yes, I would advise you to wait just to check, peace of mind, then be ready to submit the application as soon as you're clear. Is there a different application form for the exclusivity period? No, there isn't. It's the same application form. It's just they're only going to process and approve or reject based on that headcount only. Recently denied for a second round based on payroll documentation. Can I apply again with better documentation? In theory, yes, you can apply. Check with the lender. If you're not happy with the decision of the lender, seek out an alternative lender, take advice, go to an assistance provider if you can't afford a CPA or a tax preparer, and get free advice on that. That question was from Vic. Thank you, Vic. So yeah, you can reapply. Okay. Sam again has asked me a follow-up question. He's S Corp single employee. Okay, your application for a small business paycheck was not approved. Okay. Right. The basic saying, because you couldn't prove as an S Corp that you didn't have a payroll, we're therefore not in a position to approve a loan. I think you've got to go back to Chase and ask them whether when the new regulations are published next week, whether that enables you to make the application, or whether the fact that this legal structure called S Corp gets in the way and is a block to you applying, that otherwise, as say a sole proprietor, you could have made that application. Morgan asks, I don't understand why you're advising to wait till next week to apply. Isn't the exclusivity period over to March 10th? I'm only asking people to wait till next week if you're either a sole proprietor, self-employed, or you're relying on your ITIN number, or there's an issue to do with a loan default like student debt. But if you're a standard business with a payroll with less than 20 people as a headcount, then of course apply now. I hope that's clear. Morgan, if you want to come back to me on that, happy to do so. If you've been receiving an unemployment benefit, can you apply for a PPP loan? You can't do both. That's the sort of decision you have to make, whether you want to continue to apply for unemployment insurance or apply for a PPP, sorry, receive your unemployment insurance and then apply for a PPP loan. You can't what's called double dip. You can't have taxpayers' money twice or federal money twice for the same period of time. That's a key question here. So again, I think you need to take a quick bit of advice. You will know, presumably if you're a sole proprietor or self-employed, what your gross income was last year relative to net income. You'll have a sense of that dollar value. And you should also have a sense of what the unemployment insurance payout is to you in your current circumstances. And you should be able to look at those $2 numbers and make a decision as to which way you want to go. And again, I apologize for repeating this, but again, I do want people to make the best decision they can and therefore check the rules and regulations that come out this week. That was Felicia that's asking me that question. So Morgan, I hope that's a clear answer to your question. The exclusivity period is the businesses with headcount under 20, please proceed with your application now. But if you're over 20 headcount, or you're in sole proprietor, or you're relying on an ITIN number, or you've got a default question about a previous debt or loan, please wait till the rules come out next week. Let me see that I didn't miss any questions. Okay. I think I've tried to cover every question that's been in the Q&A. If you feel I haven't been able to give you a sufficiently detailed answer, then please feel free to come back to me, use my email address, and I'll try and do my best to answer that and or refer you to a technical assistance organization that will be in a position to respond. So here are my contact details. Here's my name. This is my job here in the Office of Economic Development for the city. And below that, you can see my email address, victor.farley@sanjoseca.gov. Just as a trailer for next Thursday, we go back to our normal time with our normal weekly webinar. Next week, we're going to be looking at free money. And that's everything you need to know if you have a payroll to claim the employee retention tax credit. Big changes to the tax credit for 2021. Could be substantial money if you're a business with a payroll. We'll be looking at that in some detail because this is tax filing season, and therefore many business owners will be talking to their CPA and tax preparer. They'll be looking at the opportunity to claim a refund on their 2020 payroll tax filing, and therefore it's a good one if you're interested in this to tune into our webinar next Thursday. I hope this has been a helpful run through. I apologize for doing so in a very quick fashion to make sure that we were covering the main points, the main issues here. We've tried to cover as much in the Q&A that I can, but please take the opportunity to email me if you want to follow up on anything specifically. And I wish you every success in applying for PPP and any of the other grant programs we've been promoting and any of the federal stimulus packages that have become available for small business. I've been responding to many questions via email that business owners have had, and I've encouraged business owners to continue to look for free technical assistance here in the city. We have 30 organizations that provide free advice. And of those, the Small Business Development Center have some expertise in the PPP loan program, and they're very good at responding to individual business owners with key questions. Thank you very much for registering and participating in the webinar today. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it something that you can work with, and I wish you every success with your application for a PPP loan. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Goodbye.